I went to go see Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, and as I'm watching the movie before and after, all I kept thinking was, it's a shame. It's a shame because Jason Momoa is a very good actor and a very likable guy. Patrick Wilson, same thing. James Wan's a great filmmaker, and really, and I'll get into my thoughts on the movie here. The movie didn't deserve what it's going to get. The movie's probably going to flop for a number of reasons that are outside of its control. Number one, I think it took too long to come out. I think that the movie had been done for, I think, years now, and they just held off on it for a while. The fact that Shazam 2 and The Flash both flopped this year, and even Blue Beetle didn't do so well, means that there's very bad faith right now from the fandom in the DC universe, any of these DC movies, except maybe the Reeves verse. But it just feels like everything's going against that, and I don't think Aquaman 2 is going to be any different. Alongside the fact that there seems to be a lot of apathy about DC right now. Without question, that upcoming Superman Legacy project, that has to do well. If not, we're going to be in a real bind here. And of course, don't forget the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that Amber Heard is in this movie, and a lot of people do not like Amber Heard. Amber Heard might be more despised by the fandom than even somebody like a Brie Larson. You understand what I'm saying? She is very much disliked after that public, I don't even know what you'd call it, I don't even know what you want. I mean, it's a court case, but that whole Johnny Depp situation. I know people who are not excited about DC who have straight up told me that because Amber Heard is in this movie, they're not going to go support it. So it's too bad because while I understand their reasoning behind it, so many people worked hard to make this movie, and at least they got paid. So let's talk about Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. This film is the sequel to the original Aquaman. I went into it looking at it more so as a sequel to that and only that. I'm not expecting to see Wonder Woman or Superman or any of the other characters that Arthur Curry had interacted with in the Justice League films or even in other movies. I'm not expecting any of that. I was just looking at it as a sequel to the first movie, almost like it exists in its own pocket universe. And to be honest, if you look at it like that, you will probably have a better time. I did have a good time with this movie. There are issues I'm going to discuss. This is a non-spoiler review, so I'm going to go into just the basic plot, which has already been revealed in the trailers, and that is that Black Manta has returned from the first Aquaman film. He's gotten an upgrade by tapping into some ancient Black Atlantean magic, and now it's up to Arthur and now his former enemy, his brother Orb, and it's up to them working together to save not just the seas but also the land as well from Black Manta and his ambitions. So, first of all, James Wan as a filmmaker, I've mentioned it before, the dude did a great job with the movie. The visual effects, very visual effects heavy movie. They looked good though. There's a couple of parts here and there that are hard to see, very similar to the first movie, but this one felt a lot cleaner and it was easier to see than the first one. And there's a lot of Star Wars in this movie. I mean, there's even there's multiple scenes in this movie that remind me of lightsaber duels. There are scenes that look like they were right out of like Boba Fett type of stuff is in this movie. And there's a character in the movie that resembles and even kind of behaves like Boss Nass, the leader of the Gungans from Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. He's a CGI character played by Martin Short, and I will say that this character felt a little bit cheesy for me. I didn't hate it, but this is where it starts to seep in the whole, kids movie aspect. On one hand, you've got Jason Momoa being charismatic, being awesome, super likable, both as himself and as Arthur. And then you've got Patrick Wilson, who obviously still has a little bit of resentment from what happened in the first film, and he has to work with him. And he's great in the movie as well. I really like how he plays the character in this film. He's very no-nonsense, but isn't really... No, he has an arc. He has his own arc in this movie as well. Obviously, you've got Tamora Morrison and Nicole Kidman as the veterans here. They're lovable as they always are. You've got Dolph Lundgren, being awesome. And then, of course, there's Amber Heard. Now, if you're wondering about because I'm sure some of you are wondering, how much screen time does Amber Heard actually have in this thing? There was all kinds of rumors about how there were problems with whether they want to remove her or not. If you remember, there was a rumor about she was going to get recast with Emilia Clarke, replaced by Emilia Clarke, and that never happened. So, if you're wondering about that, Amber Heard is in the first act and the third act of the movie. It's the middle chunk, the second act, that she's not really on screen at all for most of it. So, yes, she does have things to do in the first and third act, but unlike the first movie where she's basically Aquaman's partner, like not romantic partner, even though she is, I meant more so like his buddy cop partner in crime, his Robin to his Batman. In this movie, it really is more so his brother, who, I mean, there's even jokes made in the movie about how he's Loki and Aquaman's Thor, which is funny because the MCU is like their direct competitor in many ways, although I wouldn't call it a competition. Some would, and for years they were. So, it really does feel that way. However, Patrick Wilson plays his character much different than Tom Hiddleston plays any version of Loki. The only similarity is that they both kind of take themselves seriously. Too seriously, I would say. At least the early, like the early Loki kind of did that, especially when he was trying to be the villain. So the themes of this movie, I was expecting it to be a family story because now Arthur has ascended to being the king of Atlantis. He has a family now. He has to protect his family, and that, of course, plays a big role in the movie, as well as juggle the responsibilities of being king while also being on land with his dad. And there's some really good scenes in this movie with Jason Momoa and Tamora Morrison. They have great chemistry. And there's a lot of good stuff with Patrick Wilson as well. I mean, they made the movie a good time. The film, though, much like Shazam and much like, well, every comic book movie, is just a lot of CG battles and a lot of just comic book action. Now, you're probably wondering, well, of course, it's a comic book adapted movie. But you have to understand the way that Zack Snyder was kind of creating his version of the DC movie universe, he was trying to make it a bit more realistic. If you remember, the big sort of allegory in Man of Steel and going into Batman v Superman is that he was trying to make it a bit more realistic and grounded. He was trying to make it to where, okay, if Superman really did show up, would everybody like him? And that was a very interesting perspective from Zack Snyder. This movie goes the opposite direction. It's over the top. It's cheesy in some parts. It's corny in some parts. It's got some comedic one-liners. It really does feel like maybe a Marvel movie from maybe not as good as all the Phase 3 movies, but close to it. I wouldn't say it goes all the way in the comedic stuff like Guardians of the Galaxy did, but it sort of gets to that razor's edge, kind of like Iron Man was, where there's some funny stuff, but it's not thrown too much at you. But you see most of that between the interactions with Aquaman and the former Ocean Master. That's where you see most of it. I also want to talk a little bit about Yahya Abdul-Mateen as David Kane / Black Manta. Black Manta is awesome. I love the way he looks. I love his costume. He's ruthless. He does a pretty decent job in the film. I don't know if I could say that to compare him to a villain, he's not quite Killmonger. He definitely is motivated to get vengeance on Aquaman, and he definitely has reasons to be mad at him, and he's a very prideful guy. But I wouldn't say that his performance was, I thought, pretty decent in the film. I thought he did a pretty good job here. He's a good actor. With the material given, I thought he did a pretty good job. And he's definitely more interesting in this film than he was in the previous one. Also, one of the things I was not expecting going into this, and it could get a little bit political to some, although not to everyone, and that is that this movie has a bit of an environmental sort of theme to it. The idea of climate change is something that ends up being central to the plot of the film and the motivation of the characters and sort of what's happening with the world. As far as people having disagreements about, whether or not humans are the cause of it, or, maybe it's the way that the earth naturally cools and heats. It doesn't go too deep into that. as far as the political aspect of it goes, but it is central to the story of why things are happening. I also want to give props to Dr. Stephen Shin's actor, Randall Park, from Fresh Off the Boat. I was really happy with his character and the things he was able to do in this movie. But yeah, what more can I say? I don't want to sit here and say it's a generic superhero movie, because some of it is generic. It's stuff that we've seen before from other movies. It definitely borrows from stuff like Star Wars and even earlier MCU films. It's just unfortunate because I enjoyed it. Like, I actually had a good time with this one. James Wan is really good at moving the plot through without wasting too much time on one particular scene. The movie feels very fluid. It doesn't bore you at all. I wasn't bored at any point during the film, and that's more than I can say for even Shazam 2, which did have some slow parts. This, I thought, was a pretty smooth ride. But alas, at one point, this was supposed to be the next chapter in the DCEU that Zack Snyder helped to establish way back with Man of Steel, and now this has become the last moment of the Snyderverse as the DCEU comes to a close with this movie. And, you know, there were all kinds of rumored projects about Momoa coming back as Aquaman, or Momoa doing, there was like a rumor for a spin-off movie called The Trench. All that stuff's been shelved now. There are rumors of Jason Momoa playing Lobo in the upcoming Superman film, or a upcoming Superman film. But for right now, everything that was established with Man of Steel going into, obviously, the different films that came after it, Wonder Woman, which I had fun with, the first one, Justice League, the Snyder Cut. There were a lot of highlights. There really were a lot of really good highlights here. I actually liked The Flash, even though it flopped. But it's just a bummer, because watching this reminds me that it doesn't really matter for the future. And at one time it was supposed to matter. But if you're looking for a nice sort of ending, a nice close to the Snyderverse, this is about as good as you're going to get. I thought The Flash could have actually been a better end if they were actually going to use the time travel stuff to change stuff, which they didn't. That wound up not being an issue. So it was also kind of clickbait to get us to go see the movie. So if it's that time of year where money is tight and you don't want to go take the whole family to see this movie in IMAX, I understand waiting for HBO Max. If you've got one of those AMC or Regal deals where you pay X amount of dollars a month, you can see movies for free. It's not a waste of time. It's a pretty decent little movie, and it's 2 hours and 4 minutes, right around the time of Godzilla -1. The only difference is 1 minute, so it's not even going to be one of those long 3-hour bore fests, you know, where they cram too much in. No, it's a quick little film, and it's fun. But if you don't want to see it because you want to save money, I get it, and I respect it, and I think you should. Instead, go see Godzilla -1 if you haven't. That's all I have to say. Take care.